Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCGplayer affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, on today's episode, I've got a brand new deck tech for you with everyone's favorite jelly bean. But now with even more colors. So yeah, let's jump into it. So the ground rules for my deck techs are as follows. The budget is $50 or less, and that's an overall deck cost. So that cost includes shipping as well as commanders as long as they're $10 or less, but basic lands will not be included in that price. On my deck techs, I'm going to take you through the strategy, the tactics, and how the deck wins. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Michael, a Golden Pig tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without amazing patrons like Michael. And for the personalized deck tech, Michael chose Omnath, Locus of Creation with a focus on land matters with flicker effects to take advantage of ETBs and resetting the landfall trigger. Omnath Locus of Creation is the fourth iteration of Omnath, and it's a 4/4 elemental that costs red, green, white, blue. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and it has landfall and a lot of text, so here we go. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this was the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add red, green, white, blue, and if it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. That's quite a lot to take in, so let's break it down. A 4/4 for 4 that draws you a card when it ETBs isn't too bad. And we get 3 separate landfall benefits depending on how many lands came into play. Gaining 4 life for the first land is not bad, it's definitely a great way to pad our life total. That second land is probably going to be the biggest effect though, because it gives us 4 mana to work with. So we essentially cast ramp spells to get lands, to get more mana, to ramp again, and yeah. And that third one can take out planeswalkers and chip down players as well. But once you get to our 4th or 5th or 6th landfall trigger, nothing happens. So that's where flicker effects come into play, drawing us another card and resetting those landfall triggers. If we get another land into play, we gain 4 life. If we get a second land into play, we get mana, and so on and so forth. So our strategy for this deck is pretty straightforward. We're going to ramp to get Omnath out, and then ramp some more, and then more, and you get the picture. And then how do we win with this deck? We're going to ping our opponents down with landfall triggers or overwhelm them with armies. Omnath definitely isn't the only way that we can deal damage to our opponents. And as always with these deck techs, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. So first up, let's start with some ramp pieces in tactic number 1, Elementary. And of course, as always, first up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble. And if you're not sure what it does, you probably haven't seen my show before, so hi, welcome to the show. This is a fantastic card because it can ramp you by 1 land on turn 2. Next up, we've got some other cards that can ramp us early by 1 land with Fauna Fertility, Search for Tomorrow, and Sakura Tribe Elder. And then Rampant Growth, Edge of Autumn, and Farseek are great turn 2 plays to ramp us by 1 land as well. And on top of that, Edge of Autumn can actually cycle by sacrificing a land if we need to. Next up, we've got 3 cards that essentially all do the exact same thing. We've got Harrow, New Harrow, and Harrow on a Druid. Basically, we sacrifice 1 land and we get 2 basics into play, tapped or untapped, depending on the card. And then Cultivate gets us 1 basic into our hand and 1 into play tapped. Grow from the Ashes gets us 1 or 2 if we kicked it into play untapped, and Explosive Vegetation always gets us 2 into play tapped. And finally, we've got, well, pretty much just better versions of Explosive Vegetation that Wizards keeps making, and I'm not going to complain about that. Circuitous Route does the same thing in this deck because we're not running any gates. Migration Path can be cycled for 2, and Vastwood Surge is a new one, so let's talk about that. Vastwood Surge has Kicker 4, and if we kicked it, we get 2+1/+1 counters on each creature we control. So this is a ramp spell that can also pump our army permanently. But before we talk about making an army, let's talk about some more ramp. So now let's move on to tactic number 2, here and there. First up, we've got 2 different ways to get 2 landfall triggers. And Colony Heart Expedition actually has landfall itself. Basically, once we get 3 lands into play, we sack it, and we get 2 lands into play tapped. And then Dreamscape Artist is basically a Harrow on a stick. By paying 2 in blue and tapping and discarding a card, we basically Harrow. Next up though, let's talk about getting additional lands into play with things like Explore and Growth Spiral. Both basically do the same thing, but Growth Spiral is at instant speed. And then we've got some turn 1 creatures that can help us out with Arboreal Grazer, Elvish Pioneer, and Frozen Wayfarer. All are going to get a land from our hand into play by either ETB or sacrifice. Next up, we've got some repeatable effects that do the same thing with Sky Shroud Ranger, Llanowar Scout, and Walking Atlas. By tapping them, you put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. These are actually part of a combo that I mentioned in a few Land Matters episodes, but we'll get to that later. And then Badoka Gardener and Marasa Root Grazer are pretty much the same, but a little different, and let's just go through them. Badoka Gardener does the exact same thing, but once you give 10 or more lands, you flip them. And he flips into Dokai, Weaver of Life. And yes, you're required to say it like that when he flips. Anyways, he has to pay 4 green and tap in to make a huge token based on the number of lands that you have. And then Murasa Rookraiser is new from Zendikar Rise. You can as tap, you may put a basic land from your hand onto the battlefield and tap return target basic land you control to its owner's hand. So make sure you pay attention to that basic land distinction, but it is a very effective way to get lands into play and also to bounce lands back to your hand. Obviously, both can come in handy in a Landfall deck. Now you might be saying to yourself, Mitch, we've got to be done with Ramp by now. And you'd be wrong. So let's move on to tactic number 3, Extreme Land. First up, we've got Animus Awakening and Kamal's Druidic Vow, which are big X spells which can get us a ton of lands off the top of our library directly into play. Kamal's Druidic Vow gets them into play untapped, and Animus Awakening does the exact same thing if we have Spell Mastery, which is a kind of a weird mechanic. But basically, if we have 2 or more instant sorcery cards in our graveyard, we untap those lands. Kind of like Delirium. You know, who even knows what Delirium does? Comment below if you know what Delirium does. Can't we just go back to the good old days with Threshold? Anyways, our other big X spell is a new one with Nahiri's Lithoforming. It's going to make us sacrifice X lands, and for each land sacrificed this way, we draw a card. We can play X additional lands this turn, and then lands we control enter the battlefield tap this turn. The first thing that I want to mention with this card is that the sacrificing is not part of the cost like Harrow, so you're not going to be in trouble if someone counters this spell. So if it resolves, you sacrifice a ton of lands, draw a ton of cards, then put a ton of lands from your hand into play tapped. Seems pretty perfect for a Landfall deck. And outside of this in our commander, we've got plenty of other ways to draw cards. So now it's time for us to move on to tactic number 4, Creating Advantage. First up, we've got Coiling Oracle and Risen Reef, both of which play the what's on top of our library game. If it's a land, it goes onto the battlefield, otherwise it's coming into our hand. And Risen Reef does this for all of our elementals. But the creature that helps us out most with drawing cards in this deck is going to be the Golden Pig of our deck, which is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Tatyova Benthic Druid. Tatyova is a 3/3 Merfolk Druid that costs 3 green-blue, and she has whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And the best part is, she's uncommon. That is an uncommon ability apparently, gaining life and drawing cards per land. Yeah, that's absurdly good in a deck like this. That life gain is nice because again, it can help pad your life total, but that card draw is huge. Even if Tatyova only sticks around for a turn or 2, you're definitely going to get your money's worth. So yeah, definitely Golden Pig worthy in my opinion. But next up, we've got 2 plays on pretty much the same card with Urban Evolution and Escape to the Wilds. Both let us play an extra land this turn. Urban Evolution draws us 3 cards, and Escape to the Wilds Impulse draws 5. If you're not sure what Impulse Draw is, basically you exile cards from the top of your library, you can play them, and they go away at the end of your next turn. But finally, we've got some more X spells to dump a ton of mana into with Read the Runes, Wildest Dreams, and Reap the Past. Read the Runes draws us a ton of cards and makes us discard cards or sacrifice permanents. And then Wildest Dreams recurs target cards, and Reap the Past just recurs random ones because that's more fun. And it also costs less to do so because it's X instead of XX. Anyways, let's talk about taking advantage of the lanes that we already have in play though in tactic number 5 with There and Gone. First up, there's Living Twister, which can help us out in 2 ways. The first way is that we can discard lands to deal damage, but the more important way is that we can pay a green to return a tap land we control back to our hand. Essentially, this helps us get more landfall triggers when we run out of lands in our hand. And then Ruin Ghost is a fantastic new addition to landfall decks because it's in white, and white hasn't been previously really a landfall color unless you've got a unique commander that you've just built around just for landfall. But that's beside the point. Anyways, Ruin Ghost is a great card in this deck. We can pay a white and tap it to blink a land. And it doesn't say that the land comes into play tapped, so we basically just get a free landfall trigger each turn. And like those other tap combo creatures I talked about earlier, this one combos too with the exact same card. But I'm not going to mention what that card is yet, because it's in a different tactic. Because it just logically made sense to mention with other cards later. Get off my back. Speaking of back, let's move on to tactic number 6, There and Back. First up, we've got 3 cards that essentially do the exact same thing, though Ephemerate kind of does it twice. They basically all blink a creature and bring it back. Or actually, maybe it's Flicker. I can't remember which one just brings it back right away and one brings it back another turn. This is right away, okay? They all bring it back right away. I mean, the confusion really stems from these 2 cards that we're also using in this deck with Momentary Blink and Ghostly Flicker. Both exile a creature and bring it right back, though Momentary Blink has Flashback and Ghostly Flicker can actually flicker 2 things. And again, the terms Blink and Flicker came from these cards, but they have the exact same timing. Though some people use those words as different meanings, it's kind of confusing. What's not confusing, though, is how effective that these blink or flicker or whatever cards are in this deck. Again, when we blink our commander, we get that ETB again, and on top of that, we get to reset our landfall synergies. And we can also just use them to protect Omnath. These all are just really great. But now let's move on to another way to protect Omnath with tactic number 7, Not Today. This category is very simple. It's counterspells, although none of them are counterspell because that's slightly out of budget for most of my decks. And I know there might be comments with some people saying it's only $2, but that's a lot for a budget deck like this. It's one card. Anyways, some great budget counterspells are Negate, Neutralize, and Rewind. Negate counters a non-creature spell, Neutralize counters any spell and you can cycle it, and Rewind counters a spell and untaps 4 lands. Simple, effective, budget, counterspells. Moving on. So now let's move on to another simple category with a simple name, and that name is Destroy. And in this category, we're going to talk about cards that destroy things like Broken Bond, Unravel the Aether, and Crush Contraband. Broken Bond blows up an artifact or enchantment and lets us put a land from our hand into play. Unravel the Aether shuffles an artifact or enchantment back into its owner's library. And Crush Contraband doesn't really break things, although the image kind of seems like it's more just destroying something. It actually exiles either an artifact or enchantment or both. That guy must have some really strong hands to send that artifact into a different dimension. But now let's talk about the opposite of destroying things, which is creating things. In tactic number 9, create. See how I did that dichotomy between the two tactics right there? Really clever, right? Anyways, Swarm Owl makes 1/1, Zendikar Royal makes 2/2s, and Rampaging Balos makes 4/4s. That's what they do, and that's what we smack our opponents with. We've also got access to a new one since we've got white. Again, white really hasn't been a landfall color before for most decks. Anyways, Emiri Angel is a fantastic one. It has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. So we can kill our opponents with an army of saprolings, or elementals, or beasts, or even birds. Or we can take them out with some things from tactic number 10, which is They Will Fall. First up, we've got Retreat to Emiri, which gives us an option with our landfall trigger. We can make a 1/1 white core ally creature token, or creatures we control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So we can make an army with this, or we can pump an army with this, and yeah, this is a fantastic card in this deck. Another great addition from Zendikar Rising is Canyon Jeroba, which just basically does that second half of Retreat to Emeria. And now the card that you've all been waiting for, that one that combos with those other cards that I mentioned previously but did not bring up until now, it's Retreat to Coralhelm. Like other retreats, it has a landfall option, which says you may tap or untap target creature or scry 1. Scrying 1 is great, but the tapping or untapping creatures is what we're going to focus on for that combo. Or combos, I guess. They're multiple. Now, if you want to see a really in-depth breakdown of this combo, check out my Tatiova deck, but please excuse the poor mic quality and bad editing. I was new, okay? I just started the channel at that point, and I think it was like my 4th episode or something, and I'm sorry. But for those of you that don't want to go back to watch that episode, I'll go through it really quick. Any of those creatures like Walking Atlas, you can tap to put a bounce land into play. That land bounces back to your hand. Retreat to Coralhelm is going to trigger, and you can untap your Walking Atlas to do it over and over again. Essentially, infinite landfall triggers. And now the same can be done with Rune Ghost with a Plains and Retreat to Coralhelm too. Anyways, outside of tokens and combos, we can finish our opponents off with fire. Or, I guess, pinging, fire, whatever. Tunneling Geopede and Spitfire Lagak are each going to deal 1 damage to each opponent whenever a lane comes into play. And again, Omnath can ping as well, so we're going to have plenty of ways to deal out damage and take out our opponents. Yeah, this is a fun deck. Again, a huge thanks to Michael for supporting this channel and for picking Omnath. I had a lot of fun building this deck. But now that we've gone through all the cards, well, okay, except for the lands, some people have pointed out lately, Mitch, where are the lands? Lands are boring. They're boring. I'm not going to talk about the lands. They're in the deck list. Find them there. Anyways, now that we've talked about all the important cards that I feel like talking about, let's move on to the price breakdown. Keep in mind before seeing these prices, though, that Omnath is nowhere near $10 right now. I think it's around 40 or so, which is ridiculous. But anyways, it's not going to be in either of these prices that I show. So the average EDH rec Omnath Locus of Creation deck is $1,593.42. That's not a typo. That is ridiculous. Fetch lanes are expensive. Who knew? Anyways, our deck is only $50. Again, both these prices don't include the commander because it's ridiculously expensive, although you probably wouldn't even notice if the commander was actually included in the EDH rec price because, yeah, it's a lot. And even if it was included, it'd still be a lot more budget than the average deck, so there. Anyways, with all the money that you're going to be saving from not building that EDH rec deck, you can use some reasonable upgrades probably. So first up, let's add in Emeria's Shepherd by taking out Wildest Dreams. Next up, let's add in Valakut Exploration by taking out Risen Reef. And then let's add in Feldar Retreat by taking out Arboreal Grazer. Next up, let's add in Sakura Tribe Scout by taking out Crozen Wayfarer. And then let's add in Boundless Realms by taking out Elvish Pioneer. Finally, let's add in Omnath Locus of the Royal by taking out Read the Runes. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this deck tech are. Is this your favorite jelly bean of all time? And yeah, is this your favorite jelly bean? That's probably the best question I can ask. So yeah, anyways, as always, thanks again and have a good one.